Hi there, I'm David Wilcock, and this is Chris Beskar. Welcome to the show. Chris, thanks for being here.
Thank you very much. It's a delight.
Awesome. Well, I wanted to talk to you about the Michael Prophecies because the last 2 years of my life have just been overwhelmingly filled with this very strange process where in the 1990s I dictated this material that has now been prophetic of things that came out in the last 2 years. And what do I mean by dictated this material? So this material that has come through me is from the 1990s, and it was actually dictations from a source that eventually said it was Archangel Michael. And I have done a tremendous amount of research on this whole Archangel Michael story, and it's now turned into 7 books.
Wow.
So what we've got today is we've got a course where we're going to be talking about the 7 books and some of the messages that are in those books. And then we're also going to be talking to Chris about other insider topics and disclosure. And Chris, I know that at the beginning, one of the first things you want to do is thank everybody and give a report since the last show. So now is a good time. So why don't you go ahead and do that?
Well, yeah. Thank you so much, everyone, for participating in Disclosure 1. We really enjoyed putting that together. And we were delighted that so much of the critical information we released didn't slip out into the general populace. And the reason I say that is because there's some sensitive things that we don't want going out that can cause problems for either David or myself, especially as we're working on a variety of different defense projects. And some of this information, it really is fairly sensitive. And it's nice to have the audience recognize that. That said, there's been an awful lot of development since back in September of 2021, mostly on the technology side. But of course, on the global sphere, we've had so many things happen. And it's been a time of dramatic change and advancement. And in our own sense, many things within our own technology fields have kind of blossomed and exploded.
Yeah, there's been a need for us to not have you say everything, and I think that's part of the problem. Is some of the disclosure work I did in the past, even with Pete Peterson, he just sort of recklessly released whatever he knew, and this can cause a lot of trouble.
Yeah, that can cause a lot of problems. And over the course of the last 2 years, we've seen some pretty dramatic things happen. We've had the U.S. government, through various people, release some information, and it's become more and more apparent that there's interesting objects in the sky, that there have been some crashes, supposedly, that there are materials and other interesting things out there.
And with those crashes, we now have the official confirmation that we're not alone in the universe. And I just find it amazing, Chris, that nobody really seems to care that much. We heard about the PAP, or the Public Acclamation Program, right?
Correct.
That there's been this long-term effort to get us familiar with what's going on in movies.
Well, that is true. And of course, we touched on a number of things in Disclosure 1 and how essentially there has already been an acknowledgement that there are extraterrestrial spacecraft from way back in the 1940s. And one of the issues that our government has been having is to try to backpedal that. But the overall question is, who in the government is actually running the program? And that's sort of one of the major topics of our discussions to come.
Well, you have OSS, or the Office of Strategic Services, is the original naval intelligence, I guess, that started dealing with UFOs, and then it morphs into Majestic 12. And I remember, you have a very unique experience because you got welcomed into the aerospace community having made these amazing jet designs.
Correct.
When you were in 8th grade.
Yes.
And so just to reiterate, in case somebody didn't watch our last show, you had said in the last show, I think by age 18, you felt like you achieved everything that anybody could want in life.
Pretty much, yeah. By the age of 18 and 20 and 21, I was pretty content with what I had wanted to do. And of course, everything else now has been kind of an addition to that. But
and everybody keeps saying, do you think Chris can build this aerospace company? I'm like, well, look, if he could tell you all the stuff that he did, you would see that he has tremendous experience.
Yeah, well, we've been around for a long time, and part of the challenge has been that we're working in the classified world versus the non-classified world, and that's one of the big problems that I think people don't understand. As quoting Ben Rich, those who know are quiet, and you keep quiet about certain things, and it's not something that you broadcast. And part of the problem that we have today is Lockheed Skunk Works is just too well known. Their history is pretty well established, and the information out there about Lockheed you can read in books. But if you truly want to have a classified program that people don't know about, they can't know about it. That's the point. And so we've had well over 27 years, I think we're up to nearly 30 years of keeping extremely quiet on extremely quiet programs and offering the aerospace community the opportunity to participate in essentially a general open disclosure of some of our technologies and some of the processes while advancing aerospace and technology in general.
We're talking about stuff that is so heavy. I've seen a few. We do have some haters. We do have some people who really don't like us.
Oh, sure. Mostly Dassault.
Who's Dassault?
The French aircraft manufacturer. They hate us a lot. My goodness. The French developed the Rafale and the Mirage series of aircraft. And if you're familiar with the Rafale right now, they cost about $200 million, and they're probably our most hated detractors because they're trying to sell a $200 million fighter aircraft to a wide variety of countries, including India. I mean, when you think about it, can India really afford to spend $200 million per airplane?
Can anybody? I mean, honestly, we've had haters online, and people have called me warlord. People have said, oh my God, it's military. You guys are killing people. You're making machines that kill people. It's like, and my answer to that is, if you look at the current state of the American situation, and we're paying $200 million for, or more, for an airplane, which in the case of the F-35, now we find out, if it gets hit by lightning, you're out of lunch. You can't eat lunch or dinner. You just got to eject and get the hell out of that plane.
Yeah, there are severe technological problems with the F-35 that we can get into in other episodes. But I am proud to say that over the course of the last 3 years, we have not been responsible for a single death of Russians, or a single death of anyone for that matter, in the Russia-Ukraine war. So I think we're the only defense contractor that can claim that no one has
died. Haven't killed anybody.
None of our products have killed anybody in the Russia-Ukraine war, which is one of the most disastrous humanitarian wars of recent times.
Yeah, it's a very sad thing because, as I advocated from the beginning, right when it started, you solve these problems with diplomacy.
You do.
You use creative international negotiations and haggling. Hopefully everything that they do is ethical, but I mean, even if it's a little less ethical, that's a hell of a lot better than having a gigantic war where everybody's blowing each other up.
Well, that's correct. And the big goal of this is to not cause World War III and to, in fact, sue for peace as quickly as possible. And we can discuss that in further detail in other episodes.
Well, the important point, I think, because, there's 7 books of Michael Prophecies, and you show up, our company shows up in literally all of them. There are prophecies about this that are woven in through an overall message that is saying, basically, that there are human extraterrestrials who are, they definitely identify as Christian. Mm-hmm. So this is controversial for some people, and I think it may have actually hurt the course that it's like Christian angels speaking and not something that's less polarized, perhaps. But that's what we've got. We've got a source of intelligence that is saying that it can move throughout time and space, and also it's very much tied in with the law of one material. So the law of one is another really fascinating subject, Chris, because we're getting into an extraterrestrial communication that happened in 1981 that, when I first read it, it validated hundreds of other scientific things that I'd found that were very weird and not known by the public. There's, for example, the idea that Ivan T. Sanderson found that there were certain places on Earth where ships and planes would disappear. And we're all familiar with the Bermuda Triangle. Well, he found 10 of these places around the world And then what was so strange is that they were equally distant from each other. So he took all the places where somebody loses a ship on the ocean, somebody loses an airplane in the air, it vanishes, it winks out of existence, right? He graphed out all those places onto a map, and it turns out that they're all located in these equidistant spots. And then these three Russian scientists, and everybody laughs when I say their names fast, but it's Goncharov, Morozov, and Makarov.
Okay.
I don't know. Audiences always think that's funny. Whenever I say that part, they laugh. But maybe because they're so overwhelmed, they need a break. So anyway, these three Russians found out that you could put the North and South Pole on there, and now you've got what looks like an icosahedron.
Okay.
So this is a geometry that I talk about a lot in my stuff. It's a geometry that actually shows up intrinsically in matter and in biology. So that's one of the things that I wanted us to talk about, is the amazing interface between sacred geometry appearing in life and then sacred geometry appearing in matter, suggesting the universe itself is alive, right? Because if there's one template that all this is coming from, and then geometry is consistent within the laws of biology and matter, that's a very healthy step towards saying, yeah, the universe is built to be alive.
Correct.
What are your thoughts on a living universe real quick, since I brought it up?
Well, I think the universe has lent itself to a consciousness, and this consciousness is manifested in the different beings that are of spiritual nature and probably tie very well directly into Archangel Michael and all the other spiritual entities that we've encountered as a species and over human history. But the universe itself has created this life. That's the interesting part of the universe, the fact that it's teeming with life.
Right. How do you feel about reincarnation?
Oh, well, I'm a firm believer in that. I think it's a wonderful component, and even in early Christian studies, it was something that was written out of Christianity back in 500, 535, 555.
That's one of the things that we talk about in Michael Prophecies, yeah.
Yeah, it's a critical component as you delve more into the Apocrypha of Jesus and all of that. It's a major tenet. But I have my own personal beliefs in reincarnation and past lives and things like that. But I think it gets more into the nature of how the soul itself is an instrumental component of a greater universal plan.
Exactly. So when you look at reincarnation, it would imply that there is a curriculum to being alive. You don't just get born randomly and you can do whatever the hell you want. You're actually stuck in something that you're supposed to be learning something, right? Wouldn't you agree?
Well, I'd agree, but it also gets into the whole notion of, can you select when you're born again? Can you select what family you'll be born into? How your whole life will be?
Well, if you look at the Dr. Michael Newton books, there's certainly extensive evidence of how people do choose their lives, because you can hypnotize people to the in-between lives state. Mm-hmm. And then when they're in that state, they actually are aware that they've had multiple incarnations. And it appears that you get a series of choices. It's like a menu. You can have this life where you're going to have a bad leg and you're going to get hit by a car. You could have this life, and you choose the lifetime that you're going to have. But the reason I brought up reincarnation was because you mentioned a little earlier the idea of a spiritual hierarchy. And when we start discussing the spiritual hierarchy, there are some very, very fascinating Pete stories that you and I share between us, because we have in common this very high-level insider, and you actually have probably spoken to him a lot longer than I have, because you've known him many more years than I did. When did you first meet Pete?
Oh, I met Pete in the around the year 2000.
Okay, yeah. So you got 10 years on me. Mm-hmm. So there's a very fascinating topic that Pete would go into about Valiant Thor. And this is another major, major part of my book. And I remember Pete saying that Valiant Thor came from Venus and that he projected into a human body. And so it's fascinating because in the Michael Prophecies books, I found multiple references of human ETs contacting people in the 1950s. They all say kind of the same stuff, and they say they're from Venus. So with the Pete background, do you have any more things you might remember that he said about Valiant Thor?
Sure. Well, the whole Valiant Thor topic is really pretty interesting. I mean, the whole notion of life on Venus in some form is really contrary to a lot of the science that has been promoted since the 1950s, where Venus is a very hot planet with super high pressure and you couldn't live on the surface of Venus.
Right.
On the other hand, we have Venus as a Earth-sized planet. It's like a sister planet to Earth. It's more similar to Earth than Mars ever will be. And you get into the whole idea that maybe Venus is a place not necessarily for sentient physical life walking on the surface, but it could be two different things. It could be one, a place where there are beings that are living under the surface that are humanoid in form, or two, a place where there's a lot of spiritual beings, and beings of pure energy. And this is something that has come up in many of our science fiction programs. Star Trek was very good at it, having beings of pure energy. And this kind of ties into the whole notion of a being that would come from Venus and would then take on a human form.
It just flashed on me. Do you think that to the people who would be on the inside, the Majestic 12 version of Hollywood, when they're going to put this stuff out through Star Trek, do you think that for them, these benevolent ETs could be characterized as Q, the Q character? Because he's kind of a time-traveling...
Well, I don't think it ties into Q. I think Q is a bad example. I'd say the energy beings of Organia are a better example. Or if you remember the episode with the Gorn, one of our favorite episodes of Star Trek, the whole Gorn situation where Captain Kirk fights a Gorn, that's set up by an energy being who says, someday in the future, you people may evolve, the human race may evolve to being the pure energy beings we are.
Wow.
So, these are enlightened energy beings. They often dress in togas. They're enlightened features, far evolved beyond humanity.
I'm remembering now, and I'm not anywhere near the Trekkie that you are, but there was a Star Trek Next Generation episode where these people turned into light beings at the end.
True. Yeah.
And I was blown away when I was like, wow, man.
Yeah, well, classic Star Trek really, really hit on this hard. And it gets into who was writing a lot of the classic Star Trek. And of course, you have the history of Gene Roddenberry, where he wasn't a big follower of UFOs or a big believer in UFOs. He was a B-17 pilot. You do have Matt Jeffries, aerospace engineer, who designed a lot of the ships and a lot of the drawings, a lot of the artwork for Star Trek that actually came from a real-life aerospace engineer. But who knows how much impact Star Trek had, or how much influence it was fed through kind of the powers that be. So.
Well, you've given us already just some really great stuff on Venus, and you've talked about beings under the surface. Could you speculate a little more about beings that might be under the surface of Venus? Because you mentioned that in passing.
Well, just from the standpoint of looking at it from a human perspective, Venus would be a great place to do mining and industrial operations. It's already hot, it's already high pressure, it's a place that we could colonize, but not so much on the surface. It's someplace we would go to with some very strong spaceships and land and get into heavy mining and having underground facilities, a lot of underground tunnels. Venus is the proverbial place that you would honeycomb the inner surface of the planet to have operations. And so this gets into, again, a lot of the science fiction. I mean, if a Horta is going to live anywhere in the solar system, a Horta is going to live on Venus.
What's a Horta?
A Horta from Star Trek. Remember the intelligent rock monster made of silicon that Spock bonds with in the mind meld?
I kind of do.
Yeah,
right.
Like Spock's ears quite a bit. Anyhow. But yeah, Venus is this hot planet that you could, assuming that everything NASA has told us about is correct, because there's the counter view of Venus, which is this luscious tropical world, the Victorian era view of Venus, which is where all the beautiful Venusian goddesses, it's a place of beautiful women and beautiful people.
Well, I got to say, Chris, when the whole Space Brothers stuff, when I first started looking at it in the 1950s, because sometimes they call it Space Brothers.
Sure, right. Yeah.
I just, when they kept cross-referencing Venus, I'm like, come on, man. Really?
Well, this gets kind of,
Why? The planet is so hot.
right.
It's got this horrible sulfuric acid atmosphere.
Well, it's the pressure,
It would
too.
melt your flesh with acid if you go in there.
Yeah, and you're squished. Before anything, you're just squished.
So
And
what's the deal with Venus?
100 atmospheres. Well, it kind of gets into, you look into George Adamski, and
Yeah, he's in the book.
you can immediately just say, well, this guy's a crazy crackpot and he doesn't have any credibility. But the deeper you dig into him, you find out, well, this guy isn't exactly just some nutcase. He seems to actually have some interesting background.
We have that in book 4.
It's very curious. And so when he starts talking about, I was visited by a man from Saturn, is this even plausible? Well, it was kind of interesting to watch the movie Jupiter Ascending, and you see that there are spaceships, space stations, operations in the atmosphere of Jupiter. So is it conceivable that there are space stations, space vessels, extraterrestrials operating in the atmosphere of Jupiter or Saturn, so that if somebody says, hey, I come from Saturn, maybe they really do. Maybe they're not from the surface. Maybe they're in orbit in the clouds.
Well, and I got to say, if you ever have seen the book, maybe you've seen the book Ringmakers of Saturn. It's incredible. I mean, there is some photographs in that book that appear to be, objects that look like they're intelligent, and they're making the rings. That's why it's called Ring Makers.
Mm-hmm. Well, it ties into, right now there's such a push to switch to a hydrogen economy. And one of the big issues that we have here on planet Earth is, how do we generate hydrogen? Are we generating it through water? And if we're generating it through water, how are we cracking the water? Well, why go so far? Why not just have a spacecraft, systems, mining operations in the upper atmosphere of these planets like Jupiter and Saturn, and just bring the hydrogen gas compressed back to Earth? So, projecting that to extraterrestrial intelligences and saying maybe in the atmospheres of gas giant planets, we have mining operations that are being conducted by races that value hydrogen.
That's right. Whoever the author was of Ringmakers of Saturn, I'm not remembering it right now, but he assumed that they were creating the rings, but they also could have been mining the rings.
They could have been mining the rings. And so ring mining, that's an important concept.
That's pretty cool, because hydrogen is very useful.
Hydrogen and all the different metals, and it's not just hydrogen. We have all kinds of gases in those atmospheres. So, that's what's interesting. So ultimately, maybe the business isn't trying to find a cheaper way to create hydrogen gas out of separating water into constituent particles. Maybe it's mining planets with gas atmospheres.
Well, Chris, we've got to wrap it up pretty quick here, but I wanted to get a nice short episode to get started. But if you don't mind, there's lots of topics here, and we're going to get much more in depth with them. But since we have no more time, and I started to ask you about Valiant Thor, Pete shared a lot of interesting things with us, and I didn't really understand. And it was only as I went back and remembered what he told me that this came back to me. But could you tell us a little bit about the Valiant Thor story, the inside real Valiant Thor story?
Well, the inside real Valiant Thor story is completely opposite of the American Horror Story, which came out really recently. And it's interesting how they brought that to the attention of the American public when they did. This is all that's within the last 3 years. And, he was not a robot. He was not a negative energy being. They weren't here to harvest life. Instead, they were, this particular being was representative of supposedly a group of very thoughtful, kind, and generous beings that had established relationships with spiritual entities throughout the cosmos. I think he referenced Jesus Christ. He referenced these different beings as being legitimate entities, and his goal was to try to establish a positive relationship with governments here on Earth. And that included sharing of technology, sharing of different processes, the elimination of a lot of diseases, and solving world problems. And,
I love it.
As the story goes, he visited for a period of time here. He actually made the proverbial visits to the Pentagon and to the White House. And, Stranger at the Pentagon is the book that outlines a lot of this. And I think they do a good job. And so, the whole notion of, well, if aliens exist, why don't they come, to the White House, or why don't they go to Washington, D.C.? Well, that has happened on multiple occasions. It happened in 1952 with the UFO flyover. I think that's very well documented. and those days when we had lots of sightings. But the Valiant Thor story is the story that gets into the whole notion that yes, we had a visitor come down and visit our government and attempt to have a relationship that would result in not only a tech transfer but also entry of our society into a greater cosmic order.
Really? Mm-hmm. So you think that was sort of like a first contact then?
It was one of it may not have been the first contact, but it was
right, of course,
the first positive contact we had on a government-to-government level. And I think probably the best disclosure evidence or pointing at that incident is the movie The Day the Earth Stood Still, which is almost an exact outline of what supposedly happened.
So in The Day the Earth Stood Still, it appears that they have Valiant Thor's equivalent character meeting with somebody who's supposed to be Einstein, because there's the greatest scientist in the world, and they bring him in. So, and they make a big deal out of that in the movie. Do you think that Valiant Thor was also consulting with scientists like Einstein, giving us physics information or anything like that?
I think he did. I don't know if he actually met with Albert Einstein. I don't think he did that. But I think he was meeting with other individuals. It's kind of like Albert Einstein wasn't a direct participant in the Manhattan Project. He was more of a letter writing consultant who encouraged things. But he didn't really participate hands-on. But I think we have a lot of hands-on scientists and engineers. And I think a lot of the laboratories that were established before the Valiant Thor effort, like Idaho National Labs, they may have had individuals participating. Definitely Sandia National Laboratories had representatives, people from the Atomic Energy Commission. All of those types of scientists were probably involved.
Did he have like 24-hour meetings, do you know, or was he sleeping? Did his body need to sleep? Do you have any idea?
I don't think his body needed to sleep.
Okay.
But, I do think he interacted with humans on a very human level.
Right.
And so that was, I know that he had dinners and meals.
Right.
This was not a robot,
right.
And that I only reference that because American Horror Story did such a change in the Valiant Thor story.
Yeah, and I even saw, I'm not going to say who he was, but I saw a very well-known Patriot commentator saying that Valiant Thor was evil because he'd watched this television show.
Yeah, well, that's
and it's like, well, if that's all the research you do, brother, you're not going to know anything.
Well, that's the disinformation, and if you believe in either a deep state or a group of individuals who are controlling our pop culture, that's probably just a red flag right there. That hey, this information is being sanitized, it's being strongly controlled, and it's being turned into a lot of negativity mixed in with general claims that it's all fiction. And is it all fiction? Well, I would gather probably not. I mean, we live in a cosmos of a lot of beings, and that's a clear indication that if one would stand to reason that if there are intelligent life forms out there that have space capability and that they have any concern for the human race at all, they'd come and visit. And the story works out.
Yeah.
And just the fact that The Day the Earth Stood Still was produced, and it's the first, even, I think it's widely known and acknowledged that it was the first movie funded by the CIA.
Oh. So,
that.
Then there's that whole thing.
Yeah, the whole Hollywood CIA, NSA, CIA.
But I heard, Chris, that it was like they had to make the movie, that Valiant Thor essentially demanded that they give this version of the truth to the people, right? It was part of the treaty or something.
I don't think he was super demanding.
Okay.
He suggested such things.
Suggested it, right.
But I think it was I think from that standpoint, I mean, anybody who's a quote insider would kind of feel obligated to tell a good story. And it's a great story. It's a very positive story. It tells the human race to knock this stuff off, to behave properly, where you're being monitored, and there's hope and a place for you in the universe.
One more central pillar of the book, and then we'll end for today, just because we're out of time for this session. But with Pete Peterson, he also told me that Valiant Thor was involved in the plan, and Pete talked a lot about the plan. And I don't know if he talked about it with you as much as he did with me, but I went in beginning in 2009 with Pete telling me that he was having extensive briefings in these skiff rooms, sensitive compartmented information facility, and that in the skiffs, they were working on a plan to save America and to save the world from what you just mentioned, this very intense, the military-industrial complex that Eisenhower was warning about. It's real. So do you remember Pete talking about the plan? Did he ever talk to you personally about the whole
yes,
thing?
we talked about the plan, and there's multiple plans, and these plans have been going on for some time. And one of the underlying pivotal aspects of the plan has always been America needs to become a spacefaring nation, that humanity needs to be a spacefaring race, and the future of mankind is in space, and that things like asteroid mining and the colonization of space are going to solve our economic problems. And they generally will. I mean, having a spacefaring culture is going to, one, solve our needs in terms of resources, because there are unlimited resources for the human race in space, solve any population problems because there's unlimited places to habitate,
right,
and to colonize.
Maybe not. There might be some people pissed off when you get there.
Could be, but the whole idea of that there's a cosmic society that we can be part of if we behave ourselves, I think that's part of it.
Yeah.
So that's a big part of it. But it's also, but there's
I never thought about the plan as ending on us going out into space, but I also remember you had an insider recently tell me, you had an insider tell you to tell me that we need to think of America as base camp in the future.
Yeah. Well, that's
what did he mean? What did he mean by that?
Okay, so
you were the insider.
I'm the insider. I've got the base camp view, and that's being picked up on by other participants. But when you go to base camp, what is base camp? It's like when you climb Mount Everest, you start at a base camp, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, your goal isn't base camp. When you get to base camp, you've flown there, you've traveled a great distance, maybe tens of thousands of miles to get there. But it's not your mission. Your mission, that's your starting point. That's where you meet with your Sherpas, that's where you get your gear, and that's where you start your climb. And the goal is, 29,000 feet above base camp. And so the goal of the United States is not the end all. The United States is base camp. You could say that planet Earth is base camp for a greater endeavor.
Right.
So that's the good news.
So I'm just still really blown away, Chris, by the idea that the plan was built to end up with us being in space. I hadn't even really thought that far ahead, but obviously the defeat of the deep state is a major part of it.
Well, the deep state isn't really interested in space travel at all. Yeah. We've noticed that for the last 40 years, and they kind of pacified everyone in America with the space shuttle, which goes at a very high altitude, goes up to about 210 miles above the Earth, but it doesn't really go into space, so to speak. It does and it doesn't. To get into space, you need to go quite a few miles further.
Well, I was as much of a space dork as you, and when the shuttle blew up, it was as much as if I had a family member die on me.
Well, they used the destruction of the shuttles to end our space program, and now we're talking about going back to the moon, and but we're still not doing it. And comparatively speaking, you look at where aviation went. From 1903 to the 1930s, we went from an airplane that can carry one person 120 feet to the DC-3, which is traveling around the world. And we still fly DC-3s to this day. Yeah. But we don't have a DC-3 for space. We didn't get to that level. We're still stuck on the Wright Flyer. And it's disappointing, but the goal is to get to that level. And I've talked about this a lot, that one of our missions as a company, Stevati Aerospace, is to develop that space DC-3, although it's more like a space C-130 or C-5 Galaxy, but it's a regular usable transportation system that you can just get in and operate and go to places with very limited levels of support. You do your pre-flight, you fuel the airplane, you make sure it's maintained properly, but it doesn't need a major overhaul every use, and it doesn't take 6 months between overhauls.
This is our last thing because we got to close, but people get so sarcastic and cynical, and we've had a lot of people attacking us saying, you guys are just going to end up making really expensive machines that nobody can afford. And so what would your answer be to that?
Oh, that's the exact opposite. The whole purpose here is to put personal aviation into the hands of everybody. And one of our major projects, the hover car that we keep talking about, which is a very major project that we're working on at the moment, that target price point is the price of a Toyota Celica, a Toyota Camry. It's a Toyota type. It's a Honda Accord, and that's probably the best target right there. It's your $50,000 vehicle that we produce 300,000 a year. And if you look at the numbers, that's like having a Honda Accord. It's not quite a Civic. It's more of an Accord. And it's something that you can get out there. Now, can you make 1 million of them a year? Sure, you could. But your market is the general population. And that's a big difference between a lot of the vertical takeoff aircraft and personal air vehicles being discussed. A lot of the air taxis, those are becoming very expensive. I mean, there's proposed air taxis that cost $6 million a unit, and they might only hold 6 or 10 people, and they don't really.
And you got 20 minutes.
Yeah, and there's not a good business model there. No, so that's something that we can get into in other episodes. But really, general aviation being made affordable, taking it from the Lamborghini price range down into the price of an automobile that is affordable, like your common Hondas and Toyotas and Chevrolets. That's really what we're talking about.
Well, and I have to give full credit to President Trump for Agenda 47, because we are doing Agenda 47 already.
Yeah,
he talks about power plants. He talks about next generation technology, hover cars. He's mentioned that. He's mentioned building new cities. We're doing that in Niagara Falls with Wheatfield Business Park. So I'm very excited, because if that does happen, if Trump gets back into office, it seems a lot of people want that, then at that point, we're actually launching into a massive industrial revolution, a new industrial space revolution.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, there's a lot of that going on, and we're doing things in other states, beyond New York, that get into that, and of course launch vehicles and things of that nature. Some very conventional things, and of course some very advanced and exotic things. So, we're working on both.
Well, I want to thank you all for watching. This has been really great, Chris. So thank you for being with us, and we have more time to shoot. We're just getting started.
I don't see it as cute. No, I see it as, if you're familiar with the episodes regarding what's the name? It's the planet. There's a planet in Star Trek that's
Here, let's have you start that part.
Organians, the Organians.
Start that part again, yes, because
sure.
I got to fix your shirt's actually really wrinkled, and I have to remember to fix that for you. I'm not going to do this again, but just once.
Okay.
Fine.
Yeah.
There we go.
Okay.
So just take it again and pick it up on that camera.